how did you discover English country dance, and how did it change your life?
Well, I read Linda Wolf's article in the New York Times, and I'm not sure if it was 95 or 96, but I read it and I said, I'm going to do that one day. It turned out to be a couple of years before I found out how I could do that in this area, but then I found an instructor and I learned, and then I started going out and I had a wonderful time. So I would go to Binghamton and New York and Hartford and meet all these interesting people and observe the callers and the bands and just enjoy the music.
And we're here in your living room in the Stockade Historic District.
That's right.
And just down the street is the YWCA, where the first Stockade Assembly occurred.
Yes, the Stockade Assembly started here in the Stockade District, and in fact it started in this very living room. One summer, it was the summer of 2005, I got an email from Bill Newman saying he wanted to meet with myself and Jeanette and Steve Sargent, and that he would bring food and we would have a little meeting, which we did here in this living room. And he proposed that it would be a nice thing for the area to have another kind of party dance happening in, say, an afternoon on a Sunday. And would we be interested in starting up a dance? And Jeanette and I had never done anything like this before, but we said yes, we would take it on. And that was the beginning. There were some steps that had to be taken, though. At that time, he was on the board of Hudson Mohawk Traditional Dancers, and his idea was that we would be sponsored by the organization, which would mean that they would pay the bills, and we could put on a dance, and we wouldn't have any financial obligations or worries. So I made a presentation and had to go over to the board meeting. Bill Matheson was the head of it at that point, so I did the presentation, went over, and finished the presentation and went out, went to my car on the street, and Bill came out and said, oh, they voted yes. So there was the Stockade Assembly, the birth of the Stockade Assembly, of which I consider Bill Newman the grandfather. So that's how it started, and we had a very nice room at the Y here. We went and looked at it. We looked at a couple of sites, but we thought this was the best. It had chandeliers and flower drapes, and it looked, 18th century classic traditional sort of place. And so we booked that.
As time went on, how did you go about finding the callers for the...
Well, finding the callers was fun. I started to go out to balls and different events in different parts of the Northeast, and got to observe different callers. From the beginning, the idea had been to have exciting talent coming into the area, the top callers and the top bands that we could find. So that's pretty much what we did. We started off, of course, with Beverly Francis from New York. We went on, Jean Murrow came up, Brad Foster and Graham Christian came over from Massachusetts. We dipped down into the South with Anna Rain and Melissa Running and Tom Spilsbury. Towards the end of the series, David Smuckler was here. We had a wonderful time. I had a wonderful time doing it. I would keep my eye out for new people who were starting to call and beginning to rise up, and we had Dorothy Cummings up quite early in her calling venture, and then Christine Robb. I was fortunate enough to have Christine Robb come over. I think it was, I can't remember if it was 2018 or 2017, but it was always exciting, and we hardly ever repeated. I know that Brad Foster called twice and Graham Christian called twice, but we tried to have as many as we possibly could with a huge variety.
Who was the first band that you, and caller that you engaged?
The very first band was suggested by Bill Newman. It was the Fine Companions. They were from Binghamton, There was Julian and Lee Shepard, and there was Cheryl Speasy. They came and they played. We engaged them very, very quickly. That was easy. The hall was easy, as I just said. But the collar turned out to be extremely difficult because we were in September already before we got the approval from the board, and we had to find a collar for a December dance. I don't remember the exact date, the first week of December. And so we went through 5 or 6 different collars, and we were beginning to get quite worried because it was getting towards the end of October and we didn't have one. And I had heard of Beverly Francis in New York City, so I had emailed to Beverly Francis, and one morning when I was up at a professional meeting at Middlebury College, I got an email first thing in the morning at a motel, and Beverly said she would do it. So Beverly was in, and we had our first collar.
Excellent.
Great relief. So it was a very fine first dance with the fine companions, Beverly Francis.
And about the bands, how did you find all those wonderful musicians?
Well, it was the same process, finding the bands. I would go out and I would go to different balls and find them. The fine companions came a couple of times. We were also fortunate to have Hold the Mustard. I think we had them up here 3 times. The Flying Romanos played for us 4 times. We had Gotham Carnival. We had a trip to Norwich, which is Carol Compton's group from up Norwich. But then sometimes we weren't getting an actual band. We would ask Karen Axelrod if she could put together a group for us. And so she would sometimes. She would be Rachel Bell and Eric Martin. Karen, I think Alchemy was in the, in its beginning stages, and they played over here early, and Karen brought a number of musicians with her. It was fun. We'd mix them up. Or I'd say, Graham, do you have any idea about a band? And Graham might say, well, no, but why don't you get, Audrey Newth from Boston, and I'm sure she could play with so-and-so. So we did. And one time Max Newman came over from Boston, a very lively ukulele player. So that was wonderful. That was very exciting. It was fun to put the groups together with help from the callers.
So how long did the assembly run for?
We had a good run. We started, the first assembly was in December of 2005, and the last assembly was just before the pandemic in December of 2019. So we only skipped twice. We tried to do it twice a year. We only skipped 2 events. So I organized 22 of the dances, and Janet Nardolillo, who followed me as organizer, did 5. So that was our run, a good run.
And why did it end?
Well, the pandemic came. Of course, they couldn't have one in May of 2020, and then for a couple of years it was impossible to have one. And when it became time to start it up again, there was just not the energy there to do it. So it died. So
You started at the YWCA, but you moved on to other halls as time went on.
We did start at the YWCA, and it worked well for a couple of years. The first dance we probably had about 40 people, or just under 40. We outgrew it in the end, but that wasn't actually why we left. I think we'd done 2 seasons. Maybe we were starting our 3rd season, and I got a call from the Y telling me that they were using the room for the Festival of Trees, and we were going to have to use the gym. So several of us went in, looked at the gym, and were horrified because it was on the 3rd floor. There was an elevator that was really about 5 foot by 5 foot, about the size of my living room rug there, actually. And we had to load everything into it and take it up. We had to start at 10 o'clock in the morning, and up we went. We moved tricycles off the stage because there was a daycare program up there, and up a spiral staircase, and they had to come back down after the dance. Yoga mats, barbells, that sort of thing. We worked very, very hard. And after that fiasco, we decided we weren't going to deal with the Y anymore, and we had to look around for a couple of new venues. We happened upon the Shaker site, and we happened upon the First Unitarian Society in Albany's Emerson Hall. We used the Shaker site in May. We couldn't use it in December because they had a craft fair in there from the fall right straight up until almost to Christmas. So we used Emerson Hall for December for only a couple of years, but we stuck with the Shaker site because we liked it so much. Emerson Hall was difficult. There were so many chairs we had to move and so much work we had to do. The room was an odd shape. There wasn't much of a kitchen. And so we found the Albany Elks Lodge, which was a very nice room. Back in the day when I was growing up in the 50s, it was called Aurania Club, and it was a place for Albany people to have parties and dances. And so we were happy with the Elks Lodge until the end. Yes.
The Shaker site is really a special place.
It is a beautiful place. We used it for the spring, and of course it would be in May, late April or early May. We eventually went to early May because the trees would be in blossom outside, and sometimes it was sunny and there was a nice breeze. The light would come in a beautiful way that would be magical. And the floor was nice, just the general 19th century Shaker atmosphere was just very soothing and calm. It was a lovely spot. Mm-hmm. Acoustics were great too.
How many people on average came to the assemblies, do you think?
Well, the attendance at the assembly varied quite a lot. On average, I would say it was around 45. I remember once in dealing with registration that someone reporting to me that we'd had, the registrar was probably you, mm-hmm. reporting that we had 68 people registered. That was probably the peak. And I would say there may have been a couple times when there was just under 40. Yeah.
And where did people come from?
People came from adjacent dance communities. We had quite a few people coming down from Plattsburgh and from the Burlington dance community. People would come from western Massachusetts. Towards the end, we began to get more people coming from there, especially when Graham or Mary would call, or Brad. Well, that was part of the plan too. And then we had people come up from Mid-Hudson. Ken and Lindsay Morgan and Ed and Sue Lynch and people from that area. We began to, in the later days, have people coming from central New York and from the Rochester, Binghamton area, Syracuse area. In the later days, David Smuckler called, so that particular dance, I know there were people from that. So it was really pretty much the circle in the communities around us. Mm-hmm. And while it started, primarily the idea at the beginning was to provide something for the Albany and the Capital Region dance community, we grew. And you have the top talent and the bands, I think that people are attracted and they will come a further distance. So we began to attract people from farther away. Mm-hmm. And in fact, at one point, we were having more people from farther away than from the immediate area. But that was fun. It mixed things up,
How did the Stockade Assembly differ from other similar events that you'd had been to?
Well, the Stockade Assembly was different. In a way, it was kind of a hybrid between a ball and a tea dance. I mean, I don't remember going to other, afternoon dances that in the old times people might have called it tea dance. So it was kind of a hybrid sort of a thing. We were not a Saturday night, ball with a big practice beforehand. We tried to practice once. It didn't really work out very well. Not many people came. And of course our start time was 2 o'clock. So how could you'd have to have a practice at 10 and people would have to have lunch. So we didn't have a practice. We weren't at night. We had a tea party instead of, just refreshments. We made it a tea party. And that, I think, started at the very beginning when Bill had somehow the idea of teapots, and the graphic designer he found brought in teapots. So there was that. We tried to make the tea party very special. We would have only finger foods. Jeanette in particular was very vigilant that packaged goods did not come in. I once saw her discard a package of Chips Ahoy. It was something like that didn't make it onto the table. We tried to present it beautifully. You yourself, did a lot of table arranging. We had silver platters, we had doilies, and we just tried to make it very elegant.
One of the very special things about it was were the teacups and the tea plates.
We were very fortunate. Bob Gaser had many things that were his mother's, and he kept them stored in file boxes like this, all marked, whatever. And he had dozens of white teacups with kind of a gold rim. Mm-hmm. He had platters, tiered silver things like this. We didn't use spoons. That was the one concession we made to modern times. We did use plastic spoons, but everything had to be finger foods. It had to be, nicely prepared and nicely presented. Yes. Mm-hmm. It's a special tea party.
People, including yourself, got into the habit of wearing pretty fancy period clothing to the Stockade assemblies. How did you come by all of those gorgeous dresses?
Well, it actually started, it was a combination of getting into English country dance and finding the world of 18th century reenacting. Mm-hmm. In the local dance community here, there were several people who were reenactors. There was Mirly Yerbancic and Lauren Lillis and a couple of other people who were involved, and I just liked the way the clothes looked. So I started to go to reenactments and realized that there were clothes for sale, and there were people who would actually make clothes to order, seamstresses, so they would be gowns that were made for bespoke. So I started dressing up, and what could be more natural if you're going to the New York Ball or the Boston Ball to have a wonderful 18th century silken gown with everything to go with it. So that's how it started. And we did encourage people to dress up, and they did. We would have people in the afternoon in tuxedos and in period clothes, both 19th century Regency and 18th century, and the women would do the same. If they weren't into the period clothing, they would wear a long gown or a long skirt with jewelry and hats sometimes. A lot of people, a number of people would wear a hat.
There was quite a crew over time that you assembled to do all the work at and before the assembly and after the assembly.
Yes.
On the day of.
We were very fortunate because people just pitched in. Actually, something I didn't mention before was one of the differences was that there was no committee. Jeanette and I just worked as a team for 5 years, and then you and I worked as a team until Janet took over, and then you worked with Janet as a team. So we weren't burdened with a lot of discussion and so on. When we wanted to do something, we could do it. There were people who just stepped up early on, and they kind of settled into a role. And I knew that I could rely on them, so all it took was just a word to them, like, you will be doing punch, and the answer would be sure, whatever. That was Laura Paris. We had Bob Gazer, who brought all the wonderful, things for our beautiful table. Katie Selke was the tea lady. Skip Darcy, after a while, became the person who would receive the refreshments and stage them in the background and get them ready to go out onto the table. We had Marilee doing decorations, and she had people helping her. She had Grace Rydell helping her. I know Linda Goodman helped doing that, and for a while she did some graphic things for us. I'm afraid I'm going to miss people, but you'll see their names in the credits if I miss people. We did have people, wonderful people, would just stay and clean up. I remember Fred Barker and Sandy Waxgeyser just helping to clean up everything. It would be put away. It would be wonderful. They were a very, very good crew.
Yeah. It wasn't all fun. There were administrative details, were there not, that you had to undertake?
There were administrative details. Mainly, it was working with the Dance Flurry organization. There would be a budget. I would have to report in about the budget. I would have to submit a budget. It would have to be approved. I would have to report at the end, what we had spent. Sometimes I would have to deal with the accountant. So there was that. There was, of course, the money. It would all have to be counted. The bank would have to be gotten and reconciled at the end with the money from admissions. We had a registrar. I mean, you were the registrar for quite some time, the registrar. And we would receive the checks. There was the paperwork, sorting and getting them ready to go to the bank and stamping them. There was, of course, that kind of work. There was the booking and the emails to the callers and the bands to put it together, settle on dates. There was the dealing with the people at the sites, in the offices there. There was flyers. There was publicity. The flyers had to be gotten together for every dance and changed. The programs had to be made. The dance, the little things we would hang out on the little ribbons for everybody to have when they came. So yes, there were a lot of details. Yes, the big announcement, that we would send, and proofreading that, making sure it was good before it went out to, 80 or so people. So yes, it was work, but it was fun work.
You were mentioning publicity just now, and I recall that you used a number of different motifs depending on the time of year and so on. Is that right?
Yes, we did. We had several motifs. The original one was the teapot. It was on the first flyer, and that was hatched by Bill Newman and the graphic designer over in Albany. We always used that. Then when we were doing the first December assembly, we somehow decided on a snowflake. There were really nice snowflakes online you could just grab and, bring down, and they're very pretty. So every winter to the December assembly, I would add a snowflake. So we got up to quite a few snowflakes by the time we got to the end. For the spring, we hit on the tulip. It wasn't quite as much of a thing as the snowflakes were, but it was still a thing. We used different tulips. We put them on the programs and the flyers. It made it nice, and we were really consistent with it over the years too.
A big event like this does not go off without glitches from time to time, I'm sure. Do you have some that are particularly noteworthy?
There were a few bad moments, although there was never a real disaster. there were some close calls. The first one happened early while we were still right here at the Y in the Stockade. It was getting pretty late, and the band hadn't shown up. And we barely had cell phones then, so I'm not quite sure how we learned that the band was late. It was maybe 1:45 for a 2 o'clock start. And John Roberts said, well, I'll go home and get my little squeeze box in if you want. I'll just run home. I'll be back in 10 minutes. But it didn't have to be. They got there just in the nick of time. They'd come off of the Mass Pike and somehow missed the exchange and got headed up the Adirondack Northway, and were delayed quite a while before they had turned around and came back. So that was the first one, and we did have our band, no problem. Then a little bit later, I think it was in season 6, I had decided it would be nice to have Beverly repeat after 5 years, have Beverly come back as a special kind of guest caller who started us off, except that around 1 o'clock on the Saturday afternoon beforehand, I got a phone call from her saying that she was really very sick. She had seemed to be better and decided she was going to attempt it, but realized just now that she couldn't possibly do it, and we needed a replacement. So it was really only a bad 10 minutes because I thought to call Orly Krasner, and Orly agreed to do it. Whether there had been a little preparation there and Beverly had asked Orly, I don't know. I don't remember Beverly mentioning Orly. It just was like a thunderbolt, that came to my brain, call Orly, and I did it. It all worked. And then there was the case of the missing caller. We were having a December dance at Unitarian Society in Albany, and Jacqueline Schwab had to be in the Cape for a church supper Saturday night, and she felt she was going to take the bus. It would be perfectly safe. However, we were quite worried because it was winter, and what if it snowed up in the Berkshires? But that was the plan. She was coming on the bus, arriving about 1 o'clock for a 2 o'clock dance, and someone was dispatched to the bus station to pick her up. And that person came back saying, but she isn't there. So I just got in my car, I roared down to the bus station, and there she was standing outside of the bus station, and she'd been in the ladies' room all the time when the person had gone looking for her. So that was all right, but it was close.
That one, I think it was. Jacqueline wasn't calling. She was.
I'm sorry. She was the. Did I say no? She was the piano player. Yeah. She was playing a very nice late 19th century grand piano that they lived in the hall there, and Mary Lee was playing the violin. Mm-hmm. So there were the two of them. It was a duo. Mm-hmm. Yes, those were our two musicians for that one. But the funniest one happened fairly close towards the end. Maybe it was 2016 or 17. I'm not sure. But we were up at Elks Lodge, and I think for maybe the 2 years previous, we had been preceded in a slot. There had been an evangelical Christian congregation who used the hall before we did, with only an hour's turnaround time, which was difficult. But we'd gotten used to it, and we thought we could handle it. But the third time we came in, and in the middle of the room was a huge trough the farmers use for feeding, for watering their cattle. It was galvanized steel, great big thing, like this. They've been having full immersion baptisms in the congregation, and the thing had to be gotten out of the room. And it was filled with water. There was a hose and the drainage and all this, and it wasn't draining, and the minister was fussing around, and Brad Foster and Karen Axelrod and the band were just standing sort of laughing. It was a harrowing one, but it was funny. It was funny. Yes.
Well, there were those glitches, but there were also magical moments, I'm sure. Do you recall some of those?
Yes, the magical moments are really in my brain. The first one I remember was over here at the Y. we had booked Karen Axelrod, Jessica Murrow, and Doug Creighton to play for that dance. It was a spring assembly, but Jessica Murrow had an accident and wasn't able to play. So Karen suggested that she bring Darren Douglas, and she was up doing something up in the Northeast, and so we were lucky enough to have Darren Douglas play at that. And it was a beautiful spring day, and the light was coming into the room, and the music was just magical. I remember that very, very well. The other was also at the Y in the early days. It was the dance where we had been shuttled up to the gym, and Jean Murrah was calling, and all the 4 members of Hold the Mustard were there on the stage, and we'd had to work so hard. We'd gotten the drapes, the big drapes in the back arranged somehow. We propped them with pole. We'd done something, and then there were a great big wall of windows on the south too, and it was just getting to be that blue time of the evening when it's getting to be dusk and the snow started to fall into the windows. That was a beautiful time. But after each dance, when it was all over and all the work had been done and the caller had been thanked and everything had been done, there would be a moment when I would just be out of operation. I would be kind of suspended in a void, not able to do anything. And it took a couple of minutes to come to, but it was a good time because I thought, well, people have had a good time and they've been happy, and it's been good. And so that was always a good time. But the crew was so good that they would just take over for those few minutes when I really couldn't get together to deconstruct it all. And then there were a couple of times off the dance floor that were really memorable. Was one of the spring assemblies. I had a party here. Tom Spilsbury had come up from Maryland, and we had a party here in this apartment, and I think about 35 people came over, and we had make your own sandwiches and drinks, and everybody was just crowding in, having a wonderful time. And then there was a woman from Amherst saying, "Oh, you're all so friendly over here. This is just great." And oddly enough, the other off the floor episode I remember was also from people from Maryland. It was Anna Rain and Melissa Running. I'm not sure, they came up a couple of times. Once Melissa called, once Anna called, and the band Hot Toddy was there. So I'm not sure who was doing what that time, but I had been delayed over at the Shaker site, and I gave them a key, and they came in. So when I came in the back door, I heard music and came into the living room, and there they were, sitting on the floor right there with, I don't know what Anna was playing, but Melissa had her auto harp, and it was just lovely. Yeah.
Anna might have been playing her recorder, I think.
Probably that was it, yes. But the auto harp was just so unusual, and it was so nice to hear the music here, and the two of them just very much at home.
The assembly was a big effort, and now it's gone into the history books, I guess you could say. And but do you see some lasting value from all of those events?
Well, I'm not sure that I really see lasting value. I mean, I know I have some wonderful memories, and I assume that you and other people who were at the dance do. In fact, they do. Sometimes they mention it. Mm-hmm. People do mention it, and people are even interested in reviving it, but it hasn't happened yet. I don't know if it will. But at the time, it did have some value because I think that people from other dance communities became aware of Albany as a place where there was dancing. Mm-hmm. So maybe it helped our place in the world, in the dance world a little bit, because we would have good talent and good bands coming, and it was a place to go. Mm-hmm. I can't say that probably has lasted, but at the time it was good. It probably was helpful in putting us on the map a little bit. It also brought in other people to show people in this dance community other dancers and how they danced and what their manners were and what their style was. So it was a cohesive kind of thing, a regional thing. It developed some ties to the adjacent dance communities. I believe that it did.
Do you have hopes for what the future of English country dance might be in the Capital District?
Well, I would hope that in this area we could find more opportunities to dance, more opportunities for an open dance, the way we did have two, you know, and until the pandemic. It would be nice to have more dances. It would be really nice to have another party dance. If anybody wants to pick up the torch, I would really like to see that. I would also like to see more teaching workshops happening so that people on the intermediate level could begin to learn more style points, ways of relating on the dance floor, that sort of thing. I would really like to see that happen in small groups when people are ready. You know, not for beginners, but for people who had a certain confidence already, to just help them come along. When there was the Friday nights at Union, happened every Friday. It was consistent. It was regular. Getting a chance to dance more often really helps people develop. I'd love to see that happen.